Hello and welcome back to another video on Foundations of Maternal and Newborn Health. In today's video, we're going to continue on with our lectures in genetics, and we're going to talk about inheritance. And inheritance is the process of passing on DNA to your offspring or to your babies. So a mother and father will pass on their DNA to their baby, and that baby will have said to inherit their DNA from their parents. So that's inheritance. And we'll go into a little bit more detail about this. So before we kind of get into the details of inheritance, we have to talk a little bit more about how your cells actually store DNA. So if you were to actually take all the DNA from outside of a cell, and you were to put it kind of tip to tail, so you line up all the DNA kind of one on top of the other, these strands of DNA, it would reach about 6 feet long. About 6 feet long. Okay, that's crazy. So a cell is absolutely tiny. It's so small you can't even see it. And they fit 6 feet of this DNA into the nucleus of the cell, into a part of the cell. And so the body does this by condensing the DNA down into these really tight structures. And so one of these structures is known as chromosomes. And this would be a single chromosome. And so there's kind of some gaps within this DNA that I've drawn, but in reality the chromosomes are so tight that there's no gap between the DNA. They're super tightly wound around various proteins and whatnot. And so this is how every one of your cells can hold so much DNA. So in reality, your cell will keep its DNA, some of its DNA tightly wound into these chromosome-like states, and other DNA will be more loose and open. And your cell does that so that the DNA can be copied into RNA and protein when it's kind of loose and open. But in the DNA that it's not using or doesn't need, it'll keep it tightly wound into these chromosome-like structures. And so the only time your cell really has all of its DNA as chromosomes is when it's dividing or when a sperm and egg are being fertilized. But this is important to know when we talk a little bit more about inheritance. So I'm just going to clear all of this stuff off. Okay, so again, we're talking about inheritance. And when we're talking about inheriting DNA, usually we talk about chromosomes. And so each person has 22 pairs of somatic chromosomes. And one pair of sex chromosomes. Okay, so let me explain a little bit about these different types of chromosomes. So your sex chromosomes are a little self-explanatory. They determine the sex of the baby. So determines sex, okay? And so this means that the baby can either be male or it can be female based on the sex chromosomes it inherits from its parents. And your somatic chromosomes are really just everything that's not your sex chromosomes. So these are all your other chromosomes that just aren't your sex chromosomes. So that's the only distinction you need to know. So the next thing I want to explain is why we talk about chromosomes in pairs. And the reason that your chromosomes exist in pairs is because you actually get one chromosome from your mother and one chromosome from your father. Okay? So if we say that this chromosome here is from the father on the left, and then this chromosome on the right is from your mother. Okay? So these would be a single pair of one of your chromosomes. So this might be chromosomes 1. So this is the first of your chromosomes, and you get 1 from your father and 1 from your mother. So we'll say that they're pairs because they're inherited. So 1 from father, 1 from mother. And the same can be said about your sex chromosomes. But the difference between the sex chromosomes is they're given quite different names. So from the mother and the father, your chromosome 1, for example, should be almost identical. They'll be very, very similar between the mother and the father. But your sex chromosomes can be very different. And so if you're a male, you get the chromosomes X and Y. And if you're a female, you get the chromosomes X and X, or double X. So this is a little bit confusing, but I'm going to go through an example of inheritance of sex determination, and hopefully that'll clear a couple things up. So sex determination. So again, sex determination is just how the baby knows whether to become a male or whether to become a female. Okay, so we said that you get 1 chromosome from your mother and 1 from your father, and the same is true of your sex chromosomes. So we know that the father is a man, right, is a male. So he's going to have the chromosomes X and Y. The mother, we know, is a female. So the mother is going to have the chromosomes X and X, just for their sex chromosomes. That's all we're talking about in this example. So I want to go through all the possible combinations if the father gives the baby an X chromosome or a Y chromosome, and whether the mother gives either of these X chromosomes, whether that changes the outcome for the baby. Okay, so the first possibility is the father gives an X chromosome, and we'll draw this twice, or the father can give a Y chromosome. Okay, so these are the possible chromosome combinations to the baby. So this is the baby. Okay, so the mother, and for simplicity, we'll say this is X1 and this one over here is X2. So the mother can give X1 to the baby. She can also give X1 to the baby if the father gives a Y. Or the mother can give X2 to the baby. Or X2 to the baby if the father gives a Y. Okay, so the father can either give his X chromosome or his Y chromosome, and the mother can give either her first X chromosome or her second X chromosome. Right. And you can see here that if the father gives his X chromosome, whether the mother gives her first X chromosome or her second one, the baby will become female. Female. And this is about 50%. So there's a 50% chance that the baby will become female because of all these options, of these 4 options, 2 of them result in a female baby. If the father gives his Y chromosome to the baby will become male. So again, this is about 50% chance. 2 out of 4 is 50%. So if the father gives his Y, the baby will become male. And so you'll actually see a pattern. Whether the mother gives the X1 or the X2 chromosome, it doesn't matter, because whether the father gives the X or Y really determines whether the baby becomes male or whether the baby becomes female. And so in a way, it's sort of up to the father to decide the sex of the baby. And decide is not really the right word because it's not a decision that the father makes, but depending on whether the sperm that reaches the egg first has a Y chromosome or an X chromosome determines whether the baby becomes male or whether the baby will become female. So that's sex determination. Hopefully this makes sense, and we can go through some more examples if you guys need. Okay, so the last thing that I want to talk about, I know this has been a bit of a long lecture, but I wanted to go through karyotypes. So this is a picture of a karyotype. And a karyotype is just when a lab technician takes all the chromosomes from a cell. So in this case, we can assume it's a baby's cell. It's usually from a baby, and lays out all their chromosomes under a microscope to look at every single one of the chromosomes in order. And so hopefully this can help you visualize kind of what we mean by chromosome 1 and the pair of chromosome 1. So this would be the pair of chromosome 1 of chromosome, and I'll abbreviate it as CHR. So the pair of chromosome 1 here, so this would be maybe from the father over here and then the mother over here. And you can see the same thing for chromosome 2, chromosome 3, 4, 5, and so on, right? All the way up to chromosome 22. So this would be chromosome pair 22, and again, one from the father and one from the mother. And the last pair of chromosomes are the sex chromosomes here. And we'll go through another example in the next video where they're different, but these are two X chromosomes. So they're both kind of normal shaped. The Y will look much smaller than the X and be a bit kind of disheveled or a little bit broken. So instead we have two kind of large chromosomes as the sex chromosome. So we know that this baby is a female because it has two X chromosomes. So if the lab tech is doing a karyotype and they aren't given the sex of the baby, they should be able to tell just from the sex chromosomes. So hopefully this helps you kind of visualize what the chromosome pairs look like, and this idea of pairs of chromosomes, one from your mother and one from your father. So in the next video, we'll talk about what happens when you have too many or not enough chromosomes, and some other causes of genetic diseases. And we'll go into a little bit more detail as to why you would want to order a karyotype.